Yo, what's up guys, it's Talon. Today we're going to be talking about the meta currently in Wild Rift for the end of the season to give you guys an idea of what to play to kind of end your push and hopefully reach whatever rank it is that you're trying to reach. We're going to start straight off with the top lane after the new patch. Warwick is still, in my opinion, the best top laner in the game, and I know you guys are probably surprised after the nerf because it was a pretty big nerf, but they didn't really touch his laning for the most part, and a lot of the nerfs are going to affect jungle and the damage more on Warwick, but he's still a very strong champion. He's still an absolutely oppressive laner, and just really can literally win every lane, can 1v2 and outplay most people. So in my opinion, Warwick top's still the best top laner in the entire game. Then you gotta have all of the champions below that, which would be a lot of the bruisers, like Renekton, Darius, Camille, kind of the ones more like split pusher, but still bruiser, Aatrox, and then Mordekaiser would be like, for me, the other 5 champions that I would say are really at the top of the meta when it comes to top lane. And then we have some amazing counter picks, like Malphite, for example, is a super good counter pick right now. Overall in the top lane, anytime that the enemy pick a lot of AD champions, if they pick a lot of ADCs, if they pick just a lot of AD on their comp in general, or if you just need a good front line, Malphite is going to be very useful. So again, definitely a good counter pick champion, but probably not like a one-trick type of champion. And then after that, we have some decent bruisers that are kind of below the top ones that we mentioned initially, like Sett and Garen. Those ones are still going to be solid, but probably not as strong as the other ones that I mentioned. And then you have some counter picks to tanks. Gwen and Camille are going to be, again, the main counter picks to tanks. So when you see angles, pick those champions. If the enemy pick a lot of tanks, it's going to be really good for sure. After the Singed rework, I don't really recommend it now that they had the hotfix and everything. If you're a good Singed player, you can play him and, you know, play the weird style that people played before. But if you're not a really good Singed, I don't really recommend playing this champion after the hotfix. If you guys want my #1 most underrated champion in top lane, it would be Nasus. I genuinely think Nasus is really strong right now. I mean, his lane phase is not that bad, even though he's really good scaling. And as soon as you get out of the lane phase and you start scaling, I mean, you're going to be very broken. Very easy champion to play too. In my opinion, definitely like near the top of the top lane meta if you're looking for an underrated champion that not a lot of people will be expecting or really know how to play against. Ranged top laners recently got nerfed on this patch, and so stuff like Vayne and Tristana, Kalista are going to be a lot weaker now in the top lane. I don't really think ranged tops in general are very good, so obviously a lot of top lane players are going to be happy to hear that. You don't have to worry as much about these ranged top laners in your game anymore, so I don't really recommend playing any ranged top laners that I can think of. You can still find counter pick angles for, you know, a Vayne top and do a tank or something, but as a whole, these are not really major picks that you need to be worrying about. And then again, tanks like Ornn and Maokai, as well as Malphite, as we mentioned, they're all really solid right now. They can be very good, very consistent, but they're not going to be able to carry the same way that those top laners, like, again, you know, the Renekton, Darius, Camille, Aatrox, Mordekaiser type of champions that we mentioned initially, which is why I have them a bit below, but still very valuable champions, especially if you're duo queue or if you're just looking to kind of fit your team comp and play a more supportive style. Those, especially Ornn and Malphite, are going to be really good tanks to play. Jax is going to be a decent split pusher too. Camille kind of being the other split pusher, but I don't really think split pushing is very good in this meta. Again, those bruisers who can really lane well but still team fight super effectively are going to be mostly what you're going to want to play. And then Ambessa, she's decent, but a lot better in the jungle overall, as we'll talk about in a second. But yeah, basically, I'm going to also give you guys the top champion to play for each role if you're just looking for a champion to play for the rest of the season to really grind in your role. And for me, that's Warwick. Again, I play Warwick on my stream. I'll continue to be playing Warwick on my stream. So if you're looking to understand how to play this champion better, that is going to be the main champion that I recommend for top lane. But as a whole, again, Renekton, Darius, Camille, Aatrox, and Mordekaiser, apart from Warwick, are going to really be the top of the top lane meta right now. Okay, guys, and then for the jungle meta. So the first thing we have for the jungle meta is Ambessa and Vi really being the top 2 junglers. Ambessa is definitely #1 if you want a singular pick to climb, again, Ambessa jungle. Mega OP, and Vi is really good into Ambessa, and it's just good in general. But both of these champions are basically really good early game snowballing bruisers who, once they get fed, they like don't die. They're just so tanky. It's very hard to deal with them once you're against them, which is why they're just so dang strong right now. Then, in my opinion, Warwick's really going to be after that. I think Warwick is still really good. I think people are going to overrate how much the nerf did to him. The nerf did a lot, but he still has an insane kit. He still has really good damage. He's still really good at snowballing. So overall, still a very strong champion. Now, a couple champions that you could maybe say are going to be better than Warwick now in this meta are going to be Diana and Echo. Diana jungle has absurd amounts of damage, a really strong AP jungler after the rework. And then Echo as well got a recent buff a couple patches ago, and ever since then he's just been an amazing champion. So both of these champions, Diana and Echo, pretty much the best assassins in the meta right now in terms of jungle, and they're both AP champions, so that's the only kind of issue. Which then brings me to the next point, which is there's a lot of sort of lower health bruisers that are AD, or just straight up AD assassins, depending on the specific champion. So first off, we have Zed. So Zed after the buff, not a huge change necessarily with the buff. You know, it's a good buff, but it's nothing crazy. I've been playing against a player called Corrupt. He's a Sovereign. He's been rank 1. He plays a lot of Zed, and he kind of said his thoughts on it. Feels like the clear speed's a bit better, but as a whole, it doesn't change him in the jungle that much, but is a decent champion in the jungle still. So definitely a good AD assassin is Zed overall right now. And then again, we have more of these champions that are very similar, kind of the similar AD snowballing farming like playstyle in jungle. Riven, Wukong, Lee Sin, Talon, Viego, Xin Zhao, and again Zed, like we said, all of these champions are very good. So Riven, really good in team fighting, especially just like once you get one of those resets, but especially good early game in those skirmishes and all that. Wukong has absurd burst damage overall, so he works really well into squishier comps whenever you can pick him. Lee Sin is also just a champion who's really good at snowballing the game, really good early game, really good ganks, good gank setup, everything like that. Again, these are champions, they're all very similar. Talon is a bit more burst and assassin oriented, more similar to Zed out of this sort of list of AD assassins / bruisers that we're speaking on. Viego works really well anytime that you have some type of engage or some type of, you know, good poke champion that can get the enemy low and allow you to get easy resets off. And then Xin Zhao is going to be really good into heavy range comps because he's going to obviously utilize his ultimate really well in those types of situations. So then after that, we have some Camille and Lilia for the tank counters. So if you want to play a tank counter, Lilia or Camille, going to be great jungles for those specific situations. And then one of the most underrated, similar to Nasus junglers on the patch, is Olaf. I've been seeing the rank 1 player Valhalla, again Corrupt. Many of the top players in jungle on NA right now are utilizing Olaf really effectively. This champion is very good into heavy melee comps because it can keep its ult up, and it's very good into comps that cannot easily kite it because they have a lack of mobility. It's good into comps like that. Basically, anytime you can keep your ult up, it's going to be a pretty good pick, as we kind of said. So overall, definitely a very strong champion right now. After that, we have Hecarim, who's a decent bruiser, but in my opinion, below a lot of the other bruisers that we mentioned. Then we have Amumu and Maokai, who are just really good tanks in the meta. So when you do see a tank angle, those are going to be your 2 best options, unless you see that the enemy have really heavy AD, which this is one of the biggest changes to the jungle meta, is now anytime that the enemy pick, say, one of these AD assassin junglers, Rammus is actually going to be an amazing counter to that. Rammus has gotten a major buff at this point. He's extremely good into AD comp, so whenever you see the enemy pick a lot of AD champions, lock in that Rammus, and it's going to be the best tank jungle in the game right now. Again, if the enemy have a lot of AD, similar to Malphite in the top lane. After that, we have some champs like Shyvana is a decent scaling champion who can farm pretty well. However, you're going to struggle early game to, you know, when you do have a lot of losing lanes, which obviously we all know, you get losing lanes in solo queue fairly often, and when that happens, you're going to really just have to focus on farming and scaling up and hoping that your team doesn't end too hard until you can get to that late game, which is why she's decent but can be a little tough sometimes. Evelynn, again, after the buffs, is going to be decent for solo queue games, especially in lower elos, but the higher you go, the less you'll be able to find effectiveness for her. If you compare her to stuff like Diana and Echo, she's definitely weaker, but she still has her place in the meta, especially as a solo queue stomping champion. And then Red Kayn is going to be just a pretty solid, consistent pick as well. Good healing, good damage, everything like that. But again, to me, not as good as those other AD bruisers we mentioned before. And then Morg is just one champion. If you want to counter Vi specifically, I recommend picking Morgana. But that's overall going to be the main thing. Again, Ambessa #1 for sure in the jungle. That's overall the jungle meta. Now let's go on to mid lane. Okay, so moving on to the mid lane, Syndra is definitely going to be #1 overall. I mean, her range, her damage, her scaling, her laning, I mean, she's pretty much strong at all points in the game. And in the late game, will completely destroy you once she hits her full stacks plus 3 items. Pretty much unbeatable. Victor and Orianna are really solid control mages who kind of fall right below that. They're still really solid, but Syndra definitely like above them because Syndra is good at laning into both of them. And just overall will still outscale them. But Victor, very strong kind of late game damage and AoE, and Orianna is kind of similar. I definitely would say Victor seems a bit stronger overall, but Orianna quite close behind that. Kassadin is going to be a great counter into these AD or these AP mages, so definitely pick Kassadin anytime you see angles for it into these types of champions. But as a blind pick, Kassadin could struggle due to some of the potential counters. When we go into the other best AP assassins, we definitely see that Diana, Echo, and Akali, they're all extremely strong AP assassins right now. So those are kind of the shift in the meta compared to before, is that these assassins like Echo and Diana especially are coming a lot stronger and can potentially counter these AP mages sometimes. But because of how strong stuff like Syndra is, it's still very tough to do so most of the time. And then if you need an AD option, Yone, Yasuo, and Zed are all great. Again, Zed after his buff, a lot better in the early game because he's not going to run out of energy as much. And the Yone, Yasuo, I mean, they're always pretty much strong champions. So if you see that you have an AP jungle, which is not going to be uncommon now with the meta that we talked about in the jungle with the Echoes and the Dianas of the world, if you see that, then locking in one of these AD champions can be really solid. Other AD champions you can lock in are going to be really good for lane bullying, especially things like Jace, Akshan, and Lucian, but especially Jace. They're going to be great AD lane bullies if your goal is really to stomp and stall the game early on, if you have an AP jungler. And then assassin counters such as Lissandra, especially, like Lissandra's really solid into assassins, especially stuff like Zed. But you also have stuff like Vex and Annie, which are a little bit below that. Vex is going to be especially good into champs with a lot of dashes like Yasuo, for example. And then Annie is just going to be a solid, consistent champion, but will struggle into those mages. So you're going to want to pick her more whenever you see the enemy have a lot of shorter range champions that she can easily CC and punish and utilize her roping potential and all that type of stuff. Katarina, after her buff, is still going to be below those top assassins we mentioned, like Diana and Echo and Akali, but she is going to be solid, especially if you're really good on the champion. You can make her work, and she's a really good solo queue champion. So if you're a good Katarina, you're going to get a lot of value from Katarina still. Then Morgana and Ziggs, they're both going to be really good control mages as well, but not as good as, again, Syndra, Victor, and Orianna. So if you like those champions, it's good, but just not quite at the top of the meta the same way those other ones we mentioned are. And then Zoe is going to be a good roaming burst mage. She's always OP if you're good at her. In my opinion, most underrated champion of mid lane is Zoe almost always, but most people suck at her, including myself, honestly. So, and then lastly, Heimerdinger. He's a pretty good lane bully. He's really hard to deal with, and especially in low elo, people don't know how to play against him well. However, he will sometimes be, falling off again in comparison to these other mages, but overall he is a pretty strong champion. So that's overall going to do it for mid lane. Now let's get into ADC. Okay, then we have the ADC meta. So Varus and Kai'Sa are just going to be by far the best champions in ADC. I would say especially Varus right now is just extremely strong. If you're ever just looking for a consistent champion who works in all scenarios, Varus, mega broken. Kai'Sa, the best hyper carry champion for sure. If you have a Lulu, a Emilio, a Yuumi, Kai'Sa will 1v9 the game if she gets to 3 items with the on-hit build, the Terminus, Brunon's Wit's End build. That's just going to be so good on her right now. After that, Xayah's kind of like a tier below them, but still really consistent, good in all scenarios. So basically, if you're looking for an ADC who's really good in every scenario, Varus, Kai'Sa, Xayah, any of those champions. After that, Lucian is a great early game like lane bully into most champions. He's going to be very good overall. So definitely look for Lucian if you're looking for a short range lane bully, especially with Nami, really good combo. Caitlyn is going to be that long range lane bully, so similar obviously to Lucian, except with a much better range if you need a champion with good range, especially with the Caitlyn Melio combo. Then after that, we have some other champions like Ashe, who's kind of a decent long-range lane bully, but again, not as good as some of those other ones. And Ashe especially kind of hard for solo queue and falls off, so I don't really recommend playing Ashe necessarily. Corki, he's a consistent champion, but he's consistently not very good. He just kind of, if you want a solid champion, you can play him in every scenario, but again, just worse than those other champions we mentioned. Zeri and Sivir, in my opinion, are very underrated hyper carry champions. They're especially good with like Zeri especially is good with stuff like Yuumi and Lulu. Sivir can really work with most champions overall. Both of those champions, once they get to a certain amount of items, are going to be extremely strong. I definitely recommend those champions if you're just looking for solid champions to play. Tristana and Vayne are really bad hyper carries right now after the nerfs. I don't recommend these champions. Again, if you're looking for a hyper carry, Kai'Sa, Zeri, Sivir, play one of those. Kalista, trash lane bully right now. Don't play Kalista after the nerfs as well. Samira, not a very good lane bully, not a very good champion in general. However, when you have an aggressive champion like Alistar or Leona or something, or Rakan, you can lock into Samira if you see that it's a good game for Samira where the enemy don't have much CC, and you're going to be fine in that scenario, but overall, don't really recommend it most of the time. Jhin is going to be a solid champion with a supportive tank, but not going to be good in every scenario. So like when he's going to be a good supportive champion with a tank. So if you have a Leona or something like that, you can lock in the Jhin and you're going to be able to lane bully pretty well and you're going to be able to follow up really nicely on their CC. But in the overall, like, you know, most cases, he's not going to be the best because of the fact that enchanters are really strong right now. And then Misfortune is going to be very similar to Jhin, where Misfortune, she can be good with engaged tanks who can set up her ultimate really nicely, and she can lane well. But after the lane phase, especially if you don't have a tank to set you up, you're going to be kind of weak overall. So again, Varus, Kai'Sa, Xayah, overall, the best ADCs right now. Okay, and then if we look at the support meta, we're going to have two enchanters that are above the rest, which is similar to many of the recent metas. Milio and Lulu, especially Lulu, but really both of them are extremely broken enchanters right now. Anytime they're with a hyper carry, that hyper carry instantly becomes extremely OP. I definitely think that these are the best champions. However, again, not the best in solo queue. So Yuumi also is going to be similar to those two champions, but just worse. So basically, you have Lulu and Milio as the best duo queue enchanters with hyper carries, and then Yuumi slightly below that. If you're looking for a solo queue tank or just a frontline in general, Thresh and Nautilus are going to be really solid for this. Stuff like Leona and Alistar, also going to be nice engaged tanks. And then Rakan is fine as well if you need an engaged tank. One also engaged tank that I do recommend that I think is underrated is going to be Ornn. Overall, I think Ornn is actually a really solid underrated engaged tank as well if you're looking for one. Probably still below the likes of Nautilus or Thresh, but probably just right below those. And then another really underrated hook support is going to be Blitzcrank. Blitzcrank got a buff a couple patches ago and is actually really strong after that. So I definitely recommend playing Blitzcrank in a lot of scenarios. I actually think he's a really strong champion, really good tank as well. But again, most of those tanks I mentioned, they're all fine in most scenarios if you're good at them. Overall, pretty good. And then you have some other enchanters like Soraka, Soraka is pretty solid. Sona, not the best, but still works out decently well. And then you have some of these mage supports like Seraphine or Karma, which are going to be better for solo queue. Lux as well, better for solo queue, but not overall the strongest champions right now as a whole. Then again, after that, we have some other types of supports like Swain and Jarvan, which I know people always ask me about, so I always mention them. Jarvan, good counter pick if the enemy have really low mobility and can't escape your ultimate, but not a good champion overall. Swain, good into really heavy melee comps, but not good in most scenarios apart from that. So again, those champions, they have their niches, but they're not good most of the time. However, they do work better in solo queue when you compare it to duo or whatever. And then Pyke is always going to be a decent carry champion in support because, you know, Pyke is just, he's Pyke, right? Like, you know, you can carry, you can pop off in games, but as Pyke, you know, obviously you're going to be a lot less tanky in the later parts of the game, and you're kind of going to fall off. So that's the trade-off there that you do have to deal with. And then lastly, we have a couple of good peel supports. So Janna is going to be a great enchanter peel support whenever the enemy have a really aggressive comp. And then as well, Braum is going to be a really good peel support for any of, you know, when you need to tank your champion and you want to peel into a more aggressive comp. So overall, that's going to be the main meta. I know I didn't mention every single champion in the game. If you have questions about your specific champion or any champion that you want to know, or how to counter certain champions, ask in the comments. I'm happy to answer any of these questions that you guys do have. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video. I do coaching for $15 an hour, and I have memberships on my channel for $5 a month. So as always, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.